travelers, and welcome to another episode of Vertical Stars Podcast 4th season. How my loyal listeners, thank you for continued support. Enjoy this amazing interview because Jeff Lemire boards the mothership to discuss 10,000 ink stains. Now come aboard as we go traversing the stars. Hi, Mr. Lemire. Thank you for coming to Vertical Stars Podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me.
It's been my pleasure. I'm a big fan of a lot of your work, including Sweet Tooth and mazebook, so thank you so much for doing those. And also, you wrote Essex County. Um, your current work is a memoir called 10,000 Ink Stains. So, why was now the right time to write your memoir?
Well, I think it was a confluence of a number of things. I had moved studios actually. So, when you're moving everything, you're looking at all this stuff. And for me, a lot of the stuff is old sketchbooks, old artwork and stuff from throughout my career that had been, put in drawers and I hadn't really seen it in a while. So that was kind of going on. And, we were coming out of COVID, and I think everyone sort of that affected everyone in a different ways, but it kind
Hmm.
of made you reassess your life. And then also I think I had stopped making comics for a year to work on a TV show, Essex County TV show. And it's really the first time I had taken any kind of a significant break from working on comics
Hmm.
in 25 years. I pretty much draw every day almost, and I'm always working on the next project. And there's never been like an extended break where you get a little perspective on things. And so I think all those things were happening at once, and it kind of just made me realize, oh, geez, like I've been doing this for 20, 25 years and done all these different books. And I never look back, I'm always just sort of on to the next one. And it just felt like the right time to kind of just take a breath and kind of take stock of what I'd done. And um, yeah, and then once you start doing that, the memories start coming back, and it sort of took on a life of its own.
Now, I mean, obviously, you love comic books, you love art, you love writing. However, what kind of just occurred to me is what you just said, which was you've basically been drawing every single day for about 20 something years.
Yeah.
And even something that you love, I imagine, does potentially come with burnout. How do you avoid burnout?
Yeah, it definitely does. I've kind of learned to like structure my time in a way where I'll draw pretty intensely for a certain chunk of a book. I'll kind of set out maybe a chapter or an issue, whatever, depending on the project. And I'll kind of really, usually, maybe 3 or 4 weeks, I'll just get really into drawing and doing that. And then by the end of it, yes, I usually am kind of burnt out and need a break. And that's when I take a break and do a bunch of writing, and don't
Hmm.
draw. So I'm lucky that I kind of get to do those two different disciplines because really do use different parts of my brain. And then I'll write a bunch of stuff and kind of get burnt out on that, and then can't wait to get back to the drawing board. And it's worked for me. It's that balance, that juggling those two things has really helped keep me fresh, I think. I think if I was just a writer or just an illustrator, yeah, it would be more difficult to sustain it, I think.
And I really enjoyed reading 10,000 Ink Stain. I had a good fortune of being able to read it. So thank you very much for sending over the PDF and let me. And one thing that I kind of thought about is that there's a lot of it's basically almost a instruction manual for an indie writer on artist on how to at least pursue your dream. I mean, there's no guarantees if you follow this or that pattern you'll ever become something, but there's at least information on how to at least pursue it, right? Or how to think about it.
Mhm.
At the same time, there's a lot of, as you said, reminiscing about your career, kind of chance to look back. So maybe it's a weird question or not, but is 10,000 Ink Stains more for you to, as a chance to look back upon and reflect upon yourself, or for your fans to get a sense of a deeper understanding not only of the work that they love, but maybe help them understand how do they go about pursuing their dream.
Well, I think it can be both. I think the more confessional and sort of honest I was about what went into my books, I think
Mm.
then it ends up also being more informative for readers and stuff. So I don't think they're exclusive to one another, but a lot of it too is just demystifying the creative process because as a kid growing up, this for me it was before the internet and before we really had access to any creative people. So it was like a magic trick. I didn't know how comics were made. It didn't seem like something I could ever actually do
Mm.
myself. And I think a lot of the questions I get from young creators looking for advice is sort of some secret code to like suddenly get to do what they want to do and make comics. When the truth of it is, it's just hard work, really, and it takes a long time, and some people don't want to hear that because that's not the easy way in. The truth is, it just takes a lot of work and persistence and you have to make a lot of mistakes and kind of allow yourself room to learn from them and grow and slowly over time kind of find yourself. And so maybe, reading that journey for me will help, I guess, demystify that for someone else and just show that it really is doable.
And as you mentioned, it's a lot of hard work to become successful. I mean, I don't want to know, I've never been that successful, but obviously I can just imagine how hard it is to be that successful and have to work towards that journey. One thing that you do mention about your journey is the level of support that you have received over the years and the people who come into your life, in and out of your life, who kind of help you reach the next milestone. You mentioned your wife, Leslie Ann, Chris Staros on Top Shelf, Joe Morse, and Maurice Bellacoop.
Yep.
Oh, I got it right. Hey.
Got it.
Um, and so, can you kind of when you reflecting back, was this journey of your level of success, do you think, inevitable? Did it help coming along the way and meeting some of these people and how they came into your life? And also, do you think that level of support comes with success, or do you think they helped bring you to success?
I mean, it's hard to know because it just happened the way it happened for me, but you meet people along the way who can maybe provide insight and help you reach a new level with your work, which is some of those early teachers did, and you also meet people along the way who can help your career in certain ways. And all that's great, but it's really what you do with those opportunities, and so it's a combination of luck and meeting the right people at the right time, but also a lot of hard work to get yourself to that point, and
Hmm.
then to be able to know what to do when you get those opportunities, and um, so for me, I was, I look back and you see all these fortunate moments and encounters and people who helped me at certain points, different publishers, editors, people in my personal life, but um, I, that only gets you so far. You also have to be able to act on those things and deliver the goods, when you get an
Hmm.
opportunity. So it's a combination, I think, of the preparation and work that you put into it and also some good fortune, and yeah, I don't know if that answers the question, but that
Well, you mentioned how when you were working at DC, there also were artists who you felt was also would sabotage other artists in the community, and you don't always hear about that part of the community. So kind of dive into try to understand or help us understand like why was that an aspect of the industry as well, the community as well.
I mean, I don't want to get into specific names, but
Yeah, oh, I want to ask you to.
yeah, I mean, why is that? I think that's unfortunately just part of human nature. Whenever ego's involved and stuff, some people can behave badly, and I think, um, when I started to have some success, I think there were a few other people who maybe felt they deserved it and weren't getting it and then tried to sabotage what was happening to me. And, that's kind of an ugly side of, of
Hmm.
human nature, but, I didn't hold grudges and I didn't really dwell on that stuff too much. You just kind of keep doing your thing and hope for the best. And for me, it worked out. I didn't get caught up in any of that stuff. And a lot of the people who did aren't really working in comics anymore anyway, because probably they've rubbed other people the wrong way as well.
Hmm.
It's a big industry, so you get all kinds of personalities, right? Just like anything, and lots of good, and also that not every experience is going to be positive.
So I mean, I think your insight is very interesting because you did spend so many years early on, very much as a independent, a bit of an outsider as well, a very unique style, things of that nature. And then also you moved into you've been in the DC world for a while. And I think you also said Marvel as well. Um, when you think about the community as a whole, do you find it more supportive or less supportive? Was it more comfortable being on the outside looking in, or does it feel better to be like within the heart of the beast, as it were?
I mean, they both have advantages. When you're outside, kind of doing your own thing. The creative freedom that you have is obviously hard to beat, and you're kind of just working for yourself, and so whatever successes or failures you have, it's all on you, and for good or for worse, and that can be good, but it can get isolating and lonely too, to just be doing your own thing all the time and not sort of collaborating and being part of something bigger which is always kind of, I feel I've been lucky where I've got to maintain my indie work, doing the stuff that I write and draw, and but then I've always kind of kept one foot in the more mainstream world too, because I do kind of like being part of that bigger thing where you get to collaborate with other creators and sort of build something together. So they both have advantages and disadvantages, and I think done a pretty good job of juggling both, and not going too far into either one, but sort of taking the best out of both of those worlds, when I can.
Now, we're thinking about a little bit of Sweet Tooth, which is one of your seminal works that you created for Vertigo and became a Netflix TV show. When you're working on something like Sweet Tooth, because you are working, Vertigo is kind of a weird niche when it was around, that it was kind of it was an imprint, so it kind of was independent, but at the same time, it was for the DC engine as well. How was it difficult to maintain independence within the Vertigo imprint, or is that functioning, or did it function like an independent company?
Yeah, it was functioned totally like an independent thing. Like I had I had complete creative freedom with that. I was never I don't think there was ever anything anyone told me I couldn't do or wanted me to do that I didn't want to do. It was really I had already by the time I came to Vertigo, I'd already done a number of books on my own. So they wanted me to do my thing, and they were supportive of that. And so I was always just a very supportive environment creatively, and yeah, total creative freedom at Vertigo at the time. Yeah, for sure. It was great.
And I think actually, I think one of my favorite works of yours is mazebook. Um, when you're thinking about your project, and one thing that I thought was very kind of interesting that um, you mentioned about the projects that you didn't follow through on. And I thought it was kind of interesting because when we think about biography, well, basically it's an autobiography, a memoir, where you always talk about, a lot of people will talk about their biggest hits, right? But it's interesting to talk about the projects that you chose not to pursue. Can you kind of
Sure.
go into a little bit about what you learned from not just the projects you complete, but the ones you decide for whatever reason to step away from?
Yeah, it's been funny. Like a lot of the stuff that I would kind of start developing, but then not end up following through on, and or I'd go on. Sometimes there were different periods where you're kind of between projects, so you're kind of juggling different ideas and waiting to see which one rises up as the one you want to do, and so you develop different things, um, and a lot of the times the stuff that I didn't end up doing or didn't draw myself would sit in sketchbooks and or in notebooks, and then the ones that were I think good and that had some value, they didn't really go away. Like they stayed on my mind, and then years later I would kind of almost reinvent them as something I would do with a collaborator. That happened with Black Hammer and Snow Angels and Gideon Falls. A lot of those were old ideas that I didn't follow through on, that I kind of found a new life when I met the right collaborator. So, it's kind of that thing where you never throw away any idea, because even the stuff I haven't done, it usually ends up finding its way into something else later, in a different form. So yeah, I don't know if it's not so much of what you learn from them. It's just like the ones that have value don't go away. That's for sure.
Hmm.
They find a way of sticking around.
Now, one part of the story that I felt, um, I don't know, it was heartbroken on my part, reading a part. There was a part where you're talking about the origins of Sweet Tooth it's in 2016. And you mentioned that the idea, I think you said the idea came from sketches you were making, but you couldn't find sketches anymore because after moving so many times, you kind of like lost. Is there ever like, do you worry about that too? The ones that you put aside, like, what if something, like, what if I can't find it again, or are you getting better at like organizing so you don't lose these things?
Yeah, no, because what, when I moved studios, I really organized stuff finally and cataloged things properly, and I even did find those early
Oh,
Sweet
you
Tooth.
did.
There's the book had already been published, but um, so yeah, I'm pretty good now at documenting that stuff and scanning it and kind of keeping it in better condition, and rather than just shoved in all these random piles.
Did you ever see? Did you ever watch the TV, the sitcom, Big Bang Theory?
Off and on. I'm not
Okay.
did it.
There was an episode where the character Sheldon, who's like the super genius, went to his old notes when he was 5 years old and had his mom mail them to him because he thought it might be a genius idea somewhere in these old notebooks that he wrote when he was 5 because he was still a genius at 5 and he was writing
Yeah.
these impressive things. So, like, do you ever like just do you intentionally like I remember this, I'm going to these books, or do you sometimes just flip through to see if an idea does suddenly spark again after all these years?
No, not really. I don't often look back because I feel like I said earlier, like the ones that were really good, you're always still thinking about them. So they haven't, you haven't forgotten those ones, you know. The stuff that's forgotten usually was forgotten for a reason. Like if I look back at the old sketchbooks of stuff I hadn't seen or thought of in 15, 20 years, a lot of it was like, yeah, it's just, you know, what kind of pointless or silly or whatever. But you have to, that's part of the thing. You have to put all those ideas down and then the good ones stick around, right?
Now, your art, as you describe your art in your book as being unique, you kind of you refer to it as having a natural awkwardness. I think it was the phrase that you gave it. Your art has a natural awkwardness to it, which is makes it unique. I mean, when you look at your work, you know it's Jeff Lemire book. I mean, it has that feel to it. When you work with a collaborator, is it weird on some level because in your head, you as an artist, you're thinking, your style, your art, you're thinking about this, but the collaborator also has their own style, their own feel to it, their own ideas around it. Does it become difficult working now with collaborator that now that you have such a long career of doing your own work?
Not really, because honestly, it's gotten to the point over the last, at least the last decade, maybe more, where I usually know who's drawing a book before I even start working on it. So, and that includes stuff I'm drawing myself. So I'll kind of know this is something I'm going to draw myself, like mazebook or whatever. So as I'm writing it and conceiving it, I'm obviously thinking of how I'll do it. But when I'm doing stuff for, one of my frequent collaborators, whether it's Dustin or whoever, I'm developing an idea and thinking of that world in their style right from the beginning. So it's a totally different sort of thing. Yeah. So I don't have that problem of I that's the joy of writing for other artists is that you get to do more than one book at a time.
Hmm.
If I was just drawing, I would only ever get to do one project at a time because it takes so long to draw. So it's allowed me to kind of come up with these other stories and other worlds that I know that I probably wouldn't excel at drawing myself, but someone
Hmm.
like Dustin, whoever, it's really in their wheelhouse, and it's allowed a more diverse career for me for sure.
Is that kind of like the decision, depending on how you feel your style matches the world that you wanted to create?
Yeah, and so I usually know right away, oh, this is something that feels like it's something I want to draw, and it feels like it's in my wheelhouse, and uh and yeah, and now often like I'll know when one of my collaborators and I are getting ready to do a project, I'll start thinking of ideas that are specifically suited to their skill set, and um it's so there's never really that messy in between of like, oh,
Hmm.
am I going to draw this? I wish she'd done it like this or whatever.
Well, having been an artist for some years, is there like an artist sympathy that you bring with you to a collaboration? Because, like I said, I mean, I've only ever done writing, and I'm sure sometimes I'll write something and it'll be like, oh, this is big. I'll put all this stuff in a page, blah, blah, blah. That'll be so cool. But I'm not the artist that has to actually now go do it. But as an artist, you kind of like have sympathy about it. Like, I want to write this down like this, but at the same time, give this guy a break. He's not going to have the ability or time to do all this stuff that I'm trying to
Yeah.
get on
Well,
a
I think a
page.
big part of cartooning is like you have to edit a lot of your ideas in a way that they can be drawn. So I'm so used to doing that naturally now for myself that I think
Hmm.
when I'm writing scripts, I'm writing them in a way that they can be drawn and not I've heard from artists that I've worked with when they work with writers who don't draw. There's a lot of they have to take the script and they have to do a lot of work of like, well, I know what he's after here, but this is actually how the way it has to be drawn, or you have to kind of edit some things out. And I think I naturally do a lot of that editing as I'm writing because I'm used to thinking that way. So I think I'm maybe a bit easier to draw my scripts than some writers who don't really understand that process.
I will say I'm probably guilty of that because I know like when I handed my scripts to an artist, I always have like I still use like the in motion descriptions. Like he runs across, like, well, he doesn't. It's a still image. He does a thing, but it's like as a writer, you just kind of like it's hard to get your brain to stop and just think of like the frozen moment you're
Yeah.
trying to get to. Um, that must, and also I can think I'm sure I'm thinking three dimensionally in a panel, not two dimensionally in a panel sometimes. it must really piss off artists like crazy.
Yeah, I think that's part of it though. I think, artists who just draw from other people's scripts are used to sort of doing that process, whereas I think I take some of the work out before it gets to them. Like, so just because I'm used to doing it and I know what they have to draw and how it's done.
And there's also this interesting is a semi quote that you have in the text that I'm gonna, if you don't mind, I'm gonna use. You reference a mentor of yours, as you mentioned, Maurice Bellacoupe, who told you to think conceptually about images, create single illustrations that could clearly convey a concept, idea, and story all by themselves. Can you kind of
Yeah.
like dive into a little bit for us writing people what that means?
Yeah, I did when I did so I'd been doing comics for 4 or 5 years on my own. And I kind of reached a point where I kind of hit a wall where I wasn't developing anymore, and I needed someone else to help. Like I needed outside influence. So I took a 1 year illustration course here in Toronto. And Maurice was a really accomplished commercial illustrator. He did a lot of work for magazines and a lot of the assignments he gave us were editorial illustration, for magazines or newspapers where you read an article and you have to convey the essence of that article in one image.
Mm,
It's very much like doing a cover for a comic book, really, where you're trying to. And that was a different way of thinking about illustration for me, rather than just storytelling, where
mm.
this happens, then this happens in a panel, then this happens. You're conveying a story, and I was able to take some of that, so like and put it into the comics in a way where instead of just drawing what's happening, I would do things where I would play with layouts or play with an illustration and add surreal elements and things that would kind of convey the inner landscape of what was going on inside the character through the illustration, through the visuals. So I was kind of able to bring some of that sort of conceptual thinking into the storytelling a bit. And then you saw that in when I did Essex County and things where that really paid off. And yeah, that's the kind of thing. Those things are harder to do as a writer. They're
Mm.
easier to do when you're writing and drawing it because it's kind of a deeper level of the process where you really get into it and start kind of almost taking it apart and playing around with things. That's hard to do when you're just writing a script for someone.
Well, I think one thing I loved about reading your the memoir 10,000 Ink Stains is once again it's just this you get a sense of the gradual level of success that kind of occurred. Working in the restaurant, focusing on comic book. Which one actually that one you never went forward on, but you went. It developed. Um, when you think about your success and how that came from that struggle, I mean, is it just determination? Is it like was it there an arrogance to it? Was it just being naive and thinking eventually this happens? Is it just the passion doesn't let you stop? I mean, because I think for every for obviously for every one person who's successful, there's a lot of people who started and just gave up. They gave
Yeah.
it a year maybe. They're like I'm really into this, and then they just kind of quit. It didn't happen for me. It didn't become Alan Moore this year. In my first year, so I'm over it. So for you, what allowed you to keep get moving forward and not quitting on this?
Well, I think the thing was I wasn't focused on success or like achieving something in that way. I was more focused on the process of just enjoying the work itself. And so I wasn't really thinking like that, I was more concerned with the work itself and like slowly getting better myself and discovering new things and kind of the joy of doing that because I didn't really think I would ever make a career in comics. I think so that kind of gave me some freedom and like I wasn't trying to achieve some sort of financial success
Hmm.
or career success. I was just trying to make better comics all the time. Um, because I just didn't think I could possibly ever make a career in comics. It seemed like really far-fetched, and so that's what kept me going. And then yeah, like anyone, it does reach a point, and it did reach a point for me, maybe 4 or 5 years into it, where I'd been doing this all the time. Where yeah, I started to okay, is there any value? Like no one had really seen my work, and
Hmm.
like, is this any good, or and that's when luckily you get little outside sort of affirmations. Like I got a grant from the Zurich grant, Peter Laird's company, and that was like, oh, well, if they gave me a grant, there must be some value in what I'm doing. And that
Hmm.
keeps you going a little bit more. And then you publish that book, and then top shelf likes the next thing you do and they want to publish it. So you get these little validations along the way at that point that do keep you going,
Mm.
because I think like anyone, it's really easy to start second guessing and doubting yourself. I guess I just got enough little steps and validations along the way to keep me going. And also, like I said, I maybe my priorities weren't to be published or weren't to be rich and famous. It was just to try to get better at the craft itself. And
Mm.
so that was sort of maybe in hindsight, a healthy place to coming from.
Now, let's say you never got the Zurich grant. Let's say, was there an inner clock in your head that thought, if I can't, after this much time, it's not working, was there a clock in your head that would have stopped and said, you know what, enough is
Yeah.
enough, moving on?
Yeah, I was starting to reach that point, before that where there was a lot of self-doubt and you started to I went from my 20s to getting close to 30 really quick and I was like, okay, I gotta at some point I need to make a living and so there was like I don't know if there was a ticking clock, but it was like I think that's when I went and did that illustration course
Mm.
at, at Sheridan University. I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to learn a little more about the business of being an illustrator and stuff. And I'm going to give it this last shot. But I think if that hadn't worked, yeah, there probably would have been a point where I had to kind of, okay, this is just a hobby now, and I need
Mm.
to. Luckily, I didn't get to that point, but yeah, obviously that's on your mind. And I kind of, I never thought I'd make a living doing it. So I worked in kitchens, like in restaurants, and I kind of just always thought that's probably what my life would be. Like I'd work in kitchens. That was a good skill. You can always find employment and then I just do comics kind of as the thing I loved. And I was really happy doing that, and so that's maybe probably what I would have done. But luckily I was then, things kind of took off and I was able to do comics full time. So.
Now, I assume this is a quandary that every writer or autobiographer thinks about is when you're writing about yourself, obviously you're writing your story, and there's so many good anecdotes and stories that are in 10,000 Ink Stains. Is there ever a question of how much to reveal about yourself? How much of exposure do you want to your viewers, your readers? Because you do mention anxiety, your depression that you struggled with for a while. Was there ever a concern about pulling? Did you ever think about pulling back, or did you think this is my story? I'm just going to tell it?
Yeah, you do start to feel maybe like you're putting too much of yourself in there and you feel vulnerable, and there was a point where I considered pulling some of that stuff out. Um, and there were other personal details I have pulled out, that aren't in the book, but the anxiety and depression stuff, in the end, I felt it was important to put it out there because, uh, as someone who suffered from that a lot when I was in my 20s and stuff, and, you know, I think seeing someone else who you admire and maybe whose career you admire and knowing they've gone through that too, I think it can help people, and see
Hmm.
that yes, this is not something that needs to define my life or limit me. I can find ways to live with this and also still achieve things I want to do and have a good life. And so I think if it can help someone in that way, it was valuable to keep it in there. So I did.
I will say I think I appreciate it because like I said, I deal with anxiety all the time as well, and I appreciate having that in there and the honesty that you have that's in there. I think it's fantastic. It also led me to a quote that you put in the book as well by David Lynch, and he said in the book he said negativity is the enemy of creativity. Can you kind of dive into that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I've always found that to be pretty true. When I was at my darkest times with depression and stuff, it was really hard to work. I guess
Mm.
it can get all consuming, and I didn't do any good work in those periods. It was only when I started to kind of turn my life around and get happier and figure out more healthier ways of living and stuff that my career kind of my work sort of blossomed. And um, so I think for me, anyways, like the sort of the darker moments and the darker things, I've found through comics a way of putting them into the work
Mm.
and making something positive or productive with those feelings so you don't have to live with it. You put
Mm.
it in the work and get it there and you don't have to carry it around in your head as much. And then yeah, for me that's been that cathartic kind of process of
Mm.
making comics. Um, but yeah, in general, I do think that the whole tortured artist thing is to some degrees overblown because when like I said, when I was at my lowest points, it's almost impossible to work because you're just not. You got to be feeling good. You got to be feeling confident. You got to be excited about what you're doing, and and kind of realizing that it was important when I was younger, for sure.
And like I said, I think you did. Like I said, I found it was a fascinating read. As someone who, once again, loves comic books, loves your work, but also, that part of my brain that says like one day, I'll be a comic book writer, and blah blah blah. I think it was very. There's a lot of inspiration in that book. And there's a lot of. I think from the outsider looking in, it was nice. Maybe this is a weird way of phrasing it. It was nice to see that you struggled too, to get to the level of publishing.
I think someone, if I think of people whose work I just adore, whoever it is, a musician or a comic writer or whatever, you tend to think of them as like, you don't think of them having the same problems that you do every day and stuff,
Mm.
but everyone does, and it's all part of the process. And um, I think knowing that kind of makes it easier and more achievable for anyone to do this stuff. It's not like magic, it really is just a lot of hard work and putting yourself out there and kind of having the guts to kind of follow through on your ideas and put them out in the world, and
Mm.
it's not magic, it's just it is what it is. And allowing yourself to make mistakes and to get better too, you know. You don't just start off like Alan Moore, it takes time.
And most of us will never reach out, no matter what you do. But like I said, I thought Tell the Ink was fascinating. Where can our listeners find it?
Yeah, I mean, Dark Horse is publishing it, so it's going to be everywhere, bookstores, comic stores. I think it comes out tomorrow, well, as
Okay.
we're recording, so I don't know when it's coming. This podcast is going out, but yeah, it'll be out in July, and then I'll be at San Diego Comic-Con with Dark Horse signing copies, and yeah, it should be easily found.
So what's next for you?
Right now I'm writing and drawing a monthly comic for Boom called Minor Arcana, which is sort of like a small town supernatural detective thing, which has been really fun. So that's kind of my main focus, and then also writing Absolute Flash and Justice Society for DC. Um, and then I got a bunch of new creator-owned projects that I'm working on that'll probably come out and be announced next year.
Well, like I said, thank you so much for doing the show. Your work is awesome. 10,000 Ink Stains, I think, is a must read for anyone who dreams of being in the world of comics. And I want to thank you so much, Mr. Lemire. It was a total pleasure.
Oh man, thanks. I enjoyed it.